Hey, welcome everyone back to Energy Matters Live. My co-host, Casey Boyce. Casey, how's it going?
Good morning to you, Tim.
Casey, we just have celebrated Black History Month, in the midst of celebrating Black History Month. And for our radio listeners who are familiar with the Gullah Geechee solar array that we did down on Sapelo Island, this was just an incredible project that's going to be providing electricity to them for decades.
Yeah, what a neat project, Tim. I mean, it's really cool to hear more about kind of how that came to be and the impact that it's going to have. Tim, as you kind of look back on that project that you did, what did you take away from it? Like, what did you learn as a commissioner or someone who's engaged in the state?
Yes, solar's harder than it looks. You may think it's not a complicated technology, but I have it on my house. You have it on your house, and it's more than just putting a few panels up there. You've got to make sure you're pointing in the right direction, that your roof is in good shape, you don't have too many shade trees, that your homeowners association will allow it, and then you've got other equipment, Casey, that's important to actually doing net metering. If you happen to live in an area that does net metering, I'm a member of Jackson EMC and they do. And I had not, after I got my solar array, Casey, I had not connected to Enphase and set all that up and make sure that I had green lights. And because I didn't have green lights on that Enphase, I wasn't using any of that power. It was being spilled. So if you do put solar on your house, you need to work with your solar developer or vendor, whoever's done that, to make sure that you got everything hooked up right. Just because the panels are up there doesn't mean they're actually working.
Yeah, when I had my solar installed, there are a couple of different ways that you can install and then track the amount of energy that you're using through the Enphase system. And my installer had it set up kind of the opposite way of how it should. So it was showing all of my consumption as production, which started looking at it as like, it's probably not right. They were able to fix it really quickly. But, I don't know if you had to do this for Jackson EMC. I'm a Georgia Power customer. And as part of the interconnection, they actually had to reprogram my meter to enable me to export power back to the grid.
Yes, I had to get, I think, a new meter. Jackson does it a little bit different than Georgia Power. I think Georgia Power just reprograms and maybe adds a chip. All of those AMI meters, Casey, and I said this, from the beginning, they were really dumb meters. They weren't that smart until you added the chips and the other things. They were capable of being smart, but they weren't born smart. So you actually had to do to them to make them smart. So, Casey, another thing on the Sapelo array, it wasn't until I saw their power bill and how little they were getting on what they were putting back on the grid, because they're putting a lot back on the grid. This is a very large pavilion that powers their library. So it's not on top of their double wide library. It's actually out by the playground because they didn't want any holes penetrating the roof of this old library, because they have a lot of archives in there on Gullah history and all this happened on Sapelo. And so we built, with the help of Yellowwood, we built a separate pavilion. And when I saw how little they were getting back, I said to Ryan Sanders and Brad Carver and the others, this is not real effective. And they said, Commissioner, that's why we've been wanting to do net metering. And it was after that James Marlowe and Thatcher Young came in and said, hey, how about let's try that again? And the timing was perfect. And I was able to get commission support. And we created that pilot program for net metering that allowed those additional 5,000 customers to come in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important point, particularly for institutional customers like the library, right? Lots of faith communities, they're using more power during certain times of the week, Sunday morning, maybe Saturday evening, Wednesday evening, those kinds of things. And so if they put solar on, which a lot of faith communities have, that solar is just going back to the grid every other time, right? And I've run into this with the nonprofit that I work with in Western North Carolina, which is a Haywood EMC customer. We have something like 20 different meters, and we've got solar on a couple of buildings there. But it's tough because you've got to match the production to the usage. Unless you've got net metering there, it just doesn't make as much financial benefit, right?
That's right, Casey. We're doing these Energy Matters awards, and one of the awards is for a sustainability project to a needy community. How did we describe it in the awards, Casey? I think we said it was a best sustainability project to an unserved community is how
That
we
sounds
said
right.
it.
Yeah. Yep.
And if you ever go to Sapelo and you ever ride through the Hog Hammock community, you will come back and you go, wow, this is textbook for underserved right here. The people are isolated by an island. There's no bridge. They have to take, their kids have to take ferries to school. If they miss the ferry, you got to have somebody with another boat to go get your kids to get them back home. There's no grocery store on the island. There's one little store with very expensive things. And if you bring anything on the island or take anything off the island, like old cars or an old refrigerator, you've got to wait a long time. You got to pay. It's a very difficult life out there. We're not talking about the rich and famous lifestyle out there. This is a very poor Black community that's been on Sapelo for a very long time.
Yeah, and it's an interesting study in contrast, right? When you look at the history of the Golden Isles, and the fact that a number of them were essentially playgrounds of the rich and famous, back in the early 20th century. And Tim, you've been doing some work on this recently, haven't you?
I am. I don't have a PhD in history. I do have a couple of master's degrees from UGA, and actually had applied for a PhD in history and got rejected, unfortunately. And I wound up just doing another master's. The professors did not like my dissertation, title that I was going to do. And you have to, at UGA, when you do a PhD in history, you have to pick a professor, and he or she has to approve you and the dissertation in advance. And
Makes sense.
I was going to do the history of Doe v. Bolton. Doe v. Bolton. It was related to the abortion issue, and I think according to a professor at Georgia that really liked me, he said, "Tim, you're too controversial for that history department," and they did not want me over there. So I went back to the Grady College where I had taken a lot of schools and journalism school, and just got another master's. So you just never know, how these things work. In case you've got a master's from Georgia State, and how, as you get to know these professors, I mean, they're very committed to their field, and they want other academics following suit, and so they guard the academy. I think they guard it. But Casey, I'm writing a book about the Golden Isles. Just in the last few minutes, I'll just set the stage for folks. This is a historical fiction about a French character that comes over from France, who he's only 18 when he arrives, but he had studied, or his parents had been an assistant to Louis Pasteur, who was really the father of microbiology, and very pertinent for where we're at with COVID, I think, and thinking about just how cutting edge it was in 1885. Anyway, he comes over, and he is coming over at the exact time when the Jekyll Island Club is being created. And for those of you that have never been to Jekyll Island or haven't studied about it, it was the West Palm Beach of its day in the Gilded Age. I mean, Pulitzer had a cottage there. J.P. Morgan, one of the Vanderbilts. I mean, these were rich Northeasterners. And so my character comes there. His parents had died in a fire. He's coming there because Pasteur knew John Debinion, another Frenchman who was running the club and owned Jekyll Island. And my character, you know, gets to know former slaves and former slaves' children on various islands. And one of the things that I learned in writing this book, Casey, is about Tunis Campbell. And when Sherman came through Georgia with Field Order number 15 and basically said that any black person between the Ogeechee River and Cumberland Island would get 40 acres and a mule.
Mm-hmm.
And they got possession of the rice plantations. They didn't get title for it. And as soon as Johnson was elected president after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Field Order 15 was reversed and all the land went back to the plantation owners. So Abraham Lincoln's death had a tremendous impact on that. But we'll talk more about the book, Casey, as we get closer to its release date this summer. But it is just, I bring in the Wanderer slave yacht that landed on Jekyll in 1858, which, by the way, was illegal. And if you think about what happened in the UK when Wilberforce was there some 60 years before, they had outlawed trafficking of slaves. I mean, and here we are 60 years later, 3 generations essentially, and we're still trafficking slaves over here. I mean, it was incredible. But we'll talk more about this. But I thought it was really appropriate to go ahead and just begin the conversation here in Black History Month.
Yeah, very interesting.
Well, Casey, thanks for being on today. And I look forward to seeing just the impact that the solar panels are going to have on Sapelo through the years. Hey, folks, you're listening to Energy Matters. Thanks for being a part. Hope you have a great day. And for those of you that are still on with us here, and Casey and I record our radio segments, some of them on StreamYard. So that's why it may feel like we're closing out and then we come back and discuss it, because we run 11.5-minute segments on our radio show. If you haven't had a chance to check out our radio show, I'm going to just put this over here. Is you can listen to any back episode, wgauradio.com/Energy Matters. And it's right there in the chat. And you can see more about that. And I'll just throw that up on the screen as well, so you can see it. And, make sure you put that / at the end. Casey, John, I was mentioning Tunis Campbell. So when Sherman came through, he had a General Saxton that was working with him. It was almost like Sherman was, I don't know what was happening to the chain of the command in the Union Army at that time, but Sherman essentially made himself almost like the king down here. And he issued that field order, which is kind of spontaneous if you think about it. It wasn't an act of Congress. It was a field order. And so Tunis Campbell, who actually had been born in Charleston, was a black pastor, was free. He was living on St. Catherine's Island. And St. Catherine's Island is, a little bit north of Jekyll or St. Simon's or Little St. Simon's. It's right up there with Sapelo next door. And St. Catherine's Island became the capital of the Freedmen's Bureau.
No kidding.
With its own Congress, Constitution, armed militia, and Tunis Campbell was president. So it was almost like things in our country, because essentially as Sherman came through and Southerners, we don't like Sherman. He burned a lot of our cities. And so there's, I think, a lot of bitterness about it. But what I wasn't taught in school, and a lot of folks probably don't know, is what happened after Sherman came through up until the assassination of President Lincoln. So for those couple of years, Tunis Campbell created black schools on all these islands in the region. There were 1,000 freedmen, and I'm talking children. When I say freedmen, I'm talking people, these are the slaves have been freed, and Tunis Campbell has on St. Catherine's Island, which is right out there. You can go to the beach on St. Catherine's. You can't penetrate the high tide mark. And by the way, there are lemurs that live on St. Catherine. There were exotic animals because the New York Zoo at one time owned that island. But in fact, my character in this book, he winds up, having, a romantic relationship, pre-romantic relationship with J.P. Morgan's daughter, Anne Tracy. He goes to New York. He goes to Columbia. He gets an engineering degree, and he's friends with Seth Low, who at the time was president of Columbia, and and tennis was just starting in America. They had brought tennis back from Wimbledon, and my character, who's now 20, going to Columbia, he was very, he's a fictional character. He's very talented, and he caught on to tennis, and he was teaching the president of Columbia University how to play tennis. And he built such a strong relationship with him. Now, remember, he's living with the Morgans, J.P. Morgan, right? Really, at the time, the richest man in America.
Right.
And he's living with the Morgans. So Seth Low, who would eventually be mayor of New York in real life, he becomes mayor of New York. He gives my character 2 lemurs out of the Central Park menagerie. So there is, started in 1865, there is a zoo in Central Park. They didn't call it that. They called it a menagerie. And there were over 600 exotic animals in Central Park. And so the Bronx Zoo has not been created yet in real life. So he gives my characters these lemurs. And as my character graduates from Columbia, he comes back south. He comes back to Jekyll, and he brings these lemurs with him.
With the lemurs.
Yeah. And they eventually, as he's visiting freedmen in all these islands, because some of these schools that Tunis Campbell had started survive, right? So even though the Republican Party kind of, and you have to think post-Civil War Republican Party, right? You're thinking Abraham Lincoln, you're thinking abolition. And they, as Johnson becomes president, they begin losing power. There's an attack really in the South on Reconstructionist policies. Tunis Campbell, who becomes a state senator, is actually arrested for malfeasance, whether it, most people believe it's a trumped up charge. He is sent to prison. He works on a chain gang. He's leased out. This is a guy who was president of the Freedmen's Bureau and started all of these schools, was a minister. Once he serves his time, he leaves Georgia. He gets out of the South and goes back to New Jersey, and eventually passed away up in New Jersey. But my character, John Mark, as he's visiting with freed blacks on all of these islands, because they're still living there, and they're, they have been, they've had their land that they thought was their land. They had it taken away, and now they're working for rich Northeasterners who basically are running plantations now. So there was the Southerners are still in a difficult place. Their Confederate money, pretty much worthless. Many of them, like any officer in the Civil War, they were especially put in timeout and weren't allowed to run for political office and different things. But my character winds up back on St. Catherine's Island, and the lemurs escape. So and
your character is the reason for the lemurs, is what you're saying.
Exactly. That is not true, of course. lemurs were actually brought to St. Catharines by the New York Zoological Society. But in in my world of historical fiction, I'm having my character actually bring a male and female lemur. And so anybody that really doesn't study it too close might think my character's the actual reason. Um, so, so my character, because he knows a lot about microbiology, he's an expert winemaker, and he actually saves a freed slave, a former slave, actually Vandy, who's a Gullah Geechee, who in my story lives on Sapelo. She was actually born on St. Catharines in the story. She's a fictional character. And some Germans bought St. Catharines, and she learned German. She learned all kind of things from the Germans that were there. She went to Tunis Campbell School. She's really brilliant. And John Mark, actually J.P. Morgan and his family recognized that. She would not travel north with him because she was teaching, in my story, teaching former slave children or children. And she gets bit by a rattlesnake at Jekyll. And John Mark, who knew a lot about poison, he knew a lot about, he had studied a lot about this. He actually sucks the poison out of her leg in the story. And which, when he recounts this story to these rich white Northeastern people at the Jekyll Island Club, they weren't altogether happy about his breaking social norms and protocol. But he saved Vandy's life. He becomes a folklore hero to freed people up and down the coast. He obviously, doesn't have any baggage regarding slavery because he came from France, right? He came in from France. He speaks fluent English. His mother was friends with Wilberforce's granddaughter. He's got all of this abolitionist institutional knowledge. It's just, I'm just having a blast writing this book, Casey, because I'm going back and I'm looking at some history that I really never had a chance to study. And I mean, I don't blame anybody but myself. I mean, all of history is out there for any of us to read. It's just a matter of, are we going to stop binging Netflix long enough to read it? Right.
Right.
I love my next Netflix as much as anybody, but I'm really focused on this, and I want to release it this summer and do some special book talk. So anyway, we've talked enough about that, but I'm really pumped up about it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's a lot of fun to write, and you sent me an advanced copy, and I've had a chance to read a little bit about it, and very rich in history. So looking forward to seeing the final product.
Yeah, I'd probably say halfway done. I keep going back, reading it again, and adding more things to kind of piece it together. There is no good writing. There's only good rewriting, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, Casey, thanks for being on today.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you all next time.